Alright, hopefully we are live. I hit the go live button. Welcome back everyone to another week of the Photo EQR podcast here at Academy of Art University. My name is Elliot, and once again I'll be hosting this week's podcast episode. So today's episode will be pretty much a rerun of last week's episode with a little extra added in. Last week was all about CaptureOne, but sadly we had some technical issues. If you were here live, you were aware of that. We had some technical issues with our screen sharing, so it was a good 30 minutes of me talking about CaptureOne and going through it, but you guys yourself couldn't see it on your end. So we're going to do that again today, but we're also going to add in a small little lighting demo as well and go through kind of how strobe photography works and the very basics of it. Later on, for another stream, we might do a more complex lighting demo, maybe an actual studio instead of this tiny little broadcast space we have. We'll see. We'll see what you guys ask for and what you guys want us to cover. Because as always, this is something that we're doing for you guys as students and as people who are interested in photography. And we're always looking for feedback and ideas on what to discuss here on our weekly podcasts. You might notice that we have pretty much a completely new computer setup. It's a little off screen for you guys, but with our technical issues, we've been trying to work through them, and we've decided to try to go with a dual monitor setup. That way we can have our stream on one monitor and our screen share on a separate monitor. Last week and the previous weeks we've been using simply one monitor, so when I screen shared I would lose access to everything in YouTube. I wouldn't be able to see the chat or anything, which definitely led to some problems. One, it means I can't actually read any questions you guys might have had watching live and answer them in real time. I would have had to wait till I ended the screen share and then gone back to them. And two, it means I can't fix the errors that you guys see, like the screen share not working. We had someone mention, your screen share's not working, but I didn't see it till it was too late last week. So hopefully this week we're good to go. This is also our first week with OBS and not streaming just straight through YouTube. So hopefully that gives us some advantages as well and fixes that screen sharing issue we had last week. But it will also mean that we're using brand new software I've never used before. And so as always, even though we're now a month in, we're still working through the technical side of things. And I apologize for that. I was hoping we'd have a much smoother start, especially seeing how, I am and we are the techs here who typically solve all the issues for professors and new students. But these things take time when you start a new project, and we're sadly can't devote as much time to this as I would like, because I got pulled in a lot of directions these past few weeks, especially with the spring show coming up. But that said, let's go ahead and get started. As I said, today's going to be a bit of a split between a lighting demo and a recap of what we did last week in CaptureOne. The lighting demo will run through CaptureOne, which will give us a great opportunity to both demonstrate strobe lighting, the different modifiers and how you can change what the light looks like, at the same time as demonstrating kind of what the purpose of CaptureOne is. As I said last week, CaptureOne is often compared to Lightroom Classic. They're very similar in a lot of ways, but I think at their core, the design is slightly different. if you remember our Lightroom discussions 2 weeks ago, you'll remember that I said that Lightroom is all about organization. And the same can be said to some degree about CaptureOne, but Lightroom is really an organizational tool with a lot of additional tools on the side. Those tools include basic editing and global adjustments. They include, organizing your work and rating them. They include everything from printing out your work to bookmaking, even website design. And as an Adobe product, it works extremely well syncing with other programs like Adobe Photoshop and going back and forth between the two. But at the end of the day, Adobe Lightroom is, in my opinion, a post-production software, where on CaptureOne, while it does a lot of the same things, you can organize your work in CaptureOne, you can do edits, you can rate your photos and organize them by rating and stuff. It's more of a in-studio, on location, during the shoot. It's a very active program that you will use during the shoot rather than after, like Lightroom. And I think that is one of the biggest and core differences between the two. Is Lightroom is something you do after, and CaptureOne is something you do simultaneously while you're doing your photography shoot or session. It's really a tool to aid you during your session and help you get the best results from your session. And so we'll go through that today. So let me go ahead and try to do the screen share, and hopefully we'll have a successful screen share today. There is about a 2-minute delay between me and what's actually coming out on YouTube. And so I won't know if the screen share is successful probably for about 2 minutes until you guys can actually tell me. But let me go ahead and do it. And you'll see here is CaptureOne. At a first glance, it looks very similar to Lightroom, especially Lightroom Classic, which is what you should be working in. We have all of our tools and tabs up here, or have our import and export right up top. We have our library, just like Lightroom, but we also have some different ones. We have tether, where we can tether a camera directly to CaptureOne. This can be done through Lightroom, but CaptureOne is really built for this and is set up in a way. We then have shape. Shape is all about cropping and adjusting your photograph. Once again, this is easily done in Lightroom or almost any photo editing software, including Photoshop or even Bridge can do this to some degree. But it's pulled aside and an entire tab is dedicated to this in CaptureOne, whereas in Lightroom it's just a little tool in your adjustments. Then we have style. This is essentially your presets. Once again, Lightroom has this as well, but it's built into the adjustment area. On the left side of your adjustments in Lightroom, you'll have all your presets and your styles, as they call them here in CaptureOne. Right now we have no pre-installed styles or anything. There's a few presets, just like Lightroom. CaptureOne comes with some presets that you can use. And then of course you have your adjustments. And just like Lightroom, these are global adjustments. But if you remember back to our Lightroom discussion, Lightroom did that really cool thing of batch editing, where you could edit one photograph and apply those edits across, in theory, an infinite amount of photographs. And you would want to do that if they're very similar in style. If you took 10 product photographs and all the lighting stayed the same, and you just need to apply the same edits across all 10, if you have two very different photographs, there's no reason to apply the same edit across the two. And this is something that is unique to Lightroom, that batch editing thing. But CaptureOne has something very similar that we'll go into as we do our demo, and that is the ability for the adjustments to be applied to the next photograph you take. As I said, CaptureOne is really about a program that's meant to be used on location, on set, and it's meant to be kind of integral to the actual shooting of your photograph. And we'll see that with how the adjustments work, and how when you make an adjustment on one photograph, it'll be auto-applied to the next one you take, which can really help you build up to a final photograph. While you're on set, you can do your photographs and adjustments pretty much simultaneously and slowly build to a final product right there on set. And that's a really amazing ability. Next, we have a few more. We have our Refine tab. This is sharpening and stuff, where you can sharpen or add noise or reduce noise or grain in your photograph. And then we have our Metadata tab. Both of these, once again, exist in Lightroom. Refine exists under Adjustments in Lightroom, and Metadata exists under the Library tab in Lightroom. They're both there. Both are good. None is, Lightroom versus CaptureOne. A lot of people try to compare them and be like, oh, one is better than the other. But I think at the end of the day, they're both great programs that have different uses. CaptureOne is meant to be used during the shoot. When you have a client working with you in the studio, CaptureOne is a really powerful tool to slowly build up your photograph, from scratch. And Lightroom is a really amazing tool to organize your photographs afterwards. And maybe do a few more adjustments before bringing it in to something like Photoshop for your final adjustments. That's kind of a basic overview of what CaptureOne is kind of about. And so we'll slowly go through these tools. Last week I kind of talked about each tool as best as I could without much of a demo. We did a demo at the end. Today I think we're just going to start the demo, and we'll go through the tools as I use them. CaptureOne is a very deep program. Even I don't know too much about it. I've never taken an official class or anything. I've only ever kind of toyed around in CaptureOne myself, whereas Lightroom I've taken multiple classes on it and have a much deeper understanding. If you're out there and you're a CaptureOne expert, I definitely recommend add some helpful tips in the comments for people to know. I will say this setup of CaptureOne is the default setup. It is something you can change. Similar to Lightroom, but maybe even more so. CaptureOne can really be adjusted. If you don't like these tabs over here, you can move them to the right side. You can really change all the different modules and how they look and tailor them to your preferences. But we're going to pretty much just go and do our tether and play around with that, and we'll do some adjustments to show you kind of how those adjustments are applied to the next photograph as well. So let's go to tether. You'll see we have no camera available right now. That simply means our camera is off. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to kind of show you the set that we're working with. I'll rotate our main camera around, and then I'll try to get our tethered camera set up and ready to go. So let us show you our set as best as I can. We have a very, very simple set today. Pretty much the same set we had as last week, if you were here. So we have our flowers that we'll be photographing. They're very wilted now. They've been sitting in here for the past week, just dying essentially. We have our camera here. This is a Canon R5, a very nice professional camera. And we have our light here. This is a ProPhoto D2. It's a mono light that we can turn on. If we turn our modeling light on, you'll see that. And I'm actually going to take our zoom reflector off. This is a zoom reflector. It's a very basic modifier that helps focus the light so it doesn't spill everywhere. You'll see these used a lot in photography, but we're going to start with a bare bulb mono light to really show you just how you can, use reflectors, how you can use softboxes and other modifiers to really get the light you want for your photograph, whether that's really soft light, really hard light, whatever works best. So we got it. I can see it. You guys can see on the stream, I believe, that we can now see our camera here and all of our settings, which is really nice. We can not only see them, but we can change them as well. If I want to do, let's say we want to start at f5.6, or we want to do, a higher ISO, which we don't. Typically, when you're doing strobes, you always want your base ISO, which means your lowest ISO. I'm not sure which is best, leaving you guys looking at the set or at me, but I'm going to go ahead and turn you guys back to looking at me. As the photos come into CaptureOne, you guys will be able to see that. So I don't think there's any point of just leaving you looking at the decaying flowers. And so here we are. We can choose our capture location, and by default this is set to capture. This is something I showed last week, but I'll show again. When you make a session in CaptureOne, it automatically, and you give it, we gave this one podcast test. I think we'll make a new one for our flower shot. And it automatically creates a capture folder, an output folder, a selects folder, and a trash folder. You can actually look at the trash folder and you'll see we have some of the test shots of the flowers I did while setting up and making sure everything was working here. Which is great because when you throw something in the trash here in CaptureOne, it's simply moving it to this folder. That way if you accidentally move something you didn't want there, you can just grab it and move it into, the capture folder, if you so desired. It's a nice safety net for sure. It also saves a lot of time. If you remember Lightroom, if we go back out, Lightroom we have our catalog here, but we have to manually make our folder where the raw files were, and manually make where our final files were going to end up. For CaptureOne, that's all automatically done for you. So let's go back. Let's do a new session. And then you'll see there's two options. There's a catalog and a session. Almost everyone I know uses a session. A catalog is essentially the same thing as what Lightroom uses. And it's an organizational tool where you can store all of your photographs you've ever taken. While sessions is a much more narrow thing. And this is what makes CaptureOne slightly different. There's no such thing as a session in Lightroom, but CaptureOne does this, and this helps you really separate out every shoot you do, especially if you're a professional photographer, if you're working with clients, and you're in Lightroom. You can tether in Lightroom, yes, but your Lightroom catalog has every photo you've ever done, So if you're working with a company, like a car company, Toyota, if you're doing your car shoots for Toyota, and you're on set with, the Toyota rep and everything, you accidentally click on your Honda folder, they see all the Hondas instead of all the Toyotas, that can create a problem. And that's something that could easily happen in Lightroom, where everything's stored in one place. By doing a session, you pretty much erase that issue, because everything's separated out and very neat and clean starting place. So let's call this podcast flowers. Podcast, we're week 4 now, and we'll call this light demo flowers. Now we can choose where we put this, of course. We're going to put this in CaptureOne, and it'll go right under our test. And there are templates you can do. A lot of people will make a custom template, as I said, that fits their style, you know. That way you don't have to. It doesn't like our name, maybe because we have that there. So let's do that, and we'll get a new session going. And our session name is right up top here. Podcast Week 4, Light Demo Flowers. So let's go ahead and take a photo. And we'll see. Don't know how well it comes through on the stream, but we had our flash go off. It's successfully set up. And our photograph appears here, just like that. The first thing you'll maybe see is our exposure evaluation comes up. This is our histogram. A very helpful tool. More so I find histograms work much more on location if you're shooting, a landscape or something. You want to look at your histogram. When you're in CaptureOne, it's helpful, but the greatest tool that CaptureOne gives you, in my opinion, is the fact to look at your photograph on a big, high-resolution screen. We can see, we have a lot in the darks at -2, and then we peak a little here. I think we have probably a little bit that's blown out in our flowers, especially up here. You can see right here, they don't show up now, but if you give it, when I hold there, you can see all of our RGB values as well as our luminance value. And we're pretty much maxed out. All of them are in the 250s. Red's all the way up at 255, which is completely blown out. And we also have our exposure warning, so we can turn that on, and everything that's red is blown out. There's no detail in there. It means we're overexposed. And this is one of the many tools, maybe one of the most used and helpful tools in CaptureOne, is you can see in real time, as we're doing now, okay, our photograph we have too much light coming in, it's overexposed. We need to do something to reduce that amount of light. And if this is your first time with working with strobes, there's a few ways you can do that. You might remember the very basics of photography. You have your exposure triangle. You have your shutter speed. You have your ISO. You have your aperture. When you're working with strobes, one of those actually becomes pretty much irrelevant, and that one is shutter speed. Your shutter speed is pretty much replaced by the speed of the strobe itself. You'll see if we drop our shutter speed down to like a 50th of a second, and we take another photograph, and we put them side by side, we can do that. They're almost identical. The only real difference we see is a little bit, we have a lot of ambient light here, because we have a ton of light shining on me. But essentially, even though we cut our exposure in half, we should really have double the amount of light coming in if we weren't using a strobe. The one on our right should be completely blown out. Instead, they're almost identical. And that's because shutter speed, as I said, has no real impact on strobe photography. Instead, you set it to your sync speed, and this is what your strobe fires at. If you go above your sync speed, I believe our sync speed for this light is 1/25th. And you'll see if I go above that, if I do 200 and I take a shot, well, it looks like 200. Let's go 320. I'm almost positive that's going to be too fast. And we have a high sync speed. Let's go all the way. I mean, we'll go something crazy. And you'll see as we do this, our exposure is really not changing. No matter what we do, you know, there's a few small differences. No photo is ever going to be perfectly exact, especially when we have so much ambient light. But as we change our shutter speed, as you see, nothing's really changing. You know, it's getting, you know, even this one's maybe our darkest. But even this one, when we went up to 800, actually got a little brighter, if I have to say anything. Yeah, shutter speed really does nothing. Unless you go way past the speed of your strobe, then you'll just end up with a black screen, because the strobe didn't actually have enough time to fire and put light on your subject before the shutter of your camera closed. We're working with a mirrorless camera, so we can go pretty darn high with this setup. So what's left? You have obviously your ISO, but as I mentioned when we first started the stream, you typically want to leave your ISO at the base, at your lowest possible ISO though. No real reason to raise your ISO. The only thing, while you get more light out of that, you also end up with a lower quality image. And there's typically never a reason to lower the quality of your image simply to get more light. There's much easier and better ways to do that, which of course leaves us with aperture. If we change our aperture, you know, we will see an actual difference. Less light is coming in, and you'll see we are now much darker. If we turn our exposure warning back on, we still have a few spots that are a bit overexposed, but we're much better than we were before. And if we put these side by side, we definitely see we cut down quite a bit. Kind of the final way, you know, you have your ISO, which you really don't want to touch. The main way to control your light, through the camera at least, is through your aperture. But of course, the strobe itself has a power function that we can turn up or down. Right now we're at 5. If we wanted to lower that, we could. We could go to 4.5 or even lower. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to actually turn the actual strobe down to 4.5. And we'll take another photograph. And we'll see. You know, I think it's important to remember, you know, when you get a strobe that, you know, you remember that the strobe itself is a tool that you need to kind of control and not just leave it to do its own thing. You know, don't set up your strobe, leave it at whatever power it's automatically set to, and just try to do it all with your camera. You know, you got to do the camera and the strobe and balance the two. As I say a lot, photography is all about balance, you know, and balancing your tools correctly to get the result you want. And here we go. We have essentially got the result we want. We are not overexposed anywhere, but we have a pretty good exposure on our flowers. You know, we're not too dark anywhere, and we're not blowing out anywhere. And so we've essentially achieved a very basic photograph of these flowers. You know, if you want to check stuff like sharpness, it's a great way to do it in CaptureOne. You can just zoom in and see where you're sharp. We're at f8. We're zoomed in on our lens to about 70 millimeters, I think. So we have pretty shallow depth of field, even at f8. You'll see our front here is pretty soft. You know, and it gets, we have sharpness right here, kind of at the back of this first flower. And then the front of the second flower is pretty sharp. But we fall off very quickly. This part right here we have sharp. And then everything else, our background, our stem, and our third flower that we can't really see with our angle, is completely out of focus and blurry. And this ability, I mean, even this super simple ability to zoom in on a high resolution monitor is really great and a really powerful tool to make sure that what you want sharp is sharp. And in this case, it's not actually. I think our main focus should be this front part of this front flower. And so our focus is actually a little too far back. So let's see, we have our camera focus tool here, and if we're lucky, we should be able to control our focus through it. It's not letting us right now. I'm curious if we have autofocus turned off on our camera. We'll check. Give me 1 second. We'll see if we can get our focus going. So I'm going to do my best to focus in on that front part. In all honesty, we might actually just be too close to the flower. That front part might be too close to the lens. It might not be at the minimum focus distance. But let's see if we can get that any sharper. If not, we'll simply... It doesn't look like it. We're at our minimum focus distance, and this is still soft. So that tells me we just need to back the camera up, or move our subject back, either way. So we're going to do that. We're going to try to move our tripod back a bit, and we might even rotate our flowers a bit to try to get that third flower a bit more prominent in the frame. I'm going to zoom. And we'll keep going and kind of until we get a frame we like. If CaptureOne could add a way to control your tripod through the application of that, would be amazing. But sadly, you can only control the camera settings. And if we can get it set up to focus as well. So let us try this. I think we're pretty close. But then we'll start going through some light modifiers. We can't, as I said, we're in a pretty tiny room. I brought two in. We have the zoom reflector you saw earlier. And we have a softbox hiding on this wall. But we might try a few others that I'll have to walk out and grab from the equipment room. So if we do that, you'll see me disappear for a minute or two while I grab new items for us to try. Alright, so let's see. So I manually focused as best as I could on the front of our flower. I did a pretty good job. I think we're pretty darn sharp there. Much better than we were previously, if you want to compare. We're definitely sharper. And this is a cool tool that CaptureOne has where you can compare two photographs by holding Command and clicking. It'll put you at the exact same location. So you can see I did move our setup to the left a good amount, a few inches to the left as I rotated everything around. If nothing had moved, if we compare these two, if I zoom out and then zoom in, it should work. The Command or is it Shift? Maybe it's Shift. You'll see we go to the exact same spot. Looks like it's Shift here on the Mac. If you'll Shift down and zoom in on one, it'll zoom in on the other one you're comparing it to. And if you continue to hold shift, you can zoom around the ball. And this is a great tool to kind of compare two images, not have to drag one, be like, alright, that looks sharp, let's see if it's sharp, that's not the same area, that's the same area, that can be a bit of a pain. Totally doable, but much easier simply to hold shift and double click in and see how the focus compares. So let us do a very basic adjustment. Let's do a crop. As you see, when we changed our adjustment, we're getting a bit of the vase in here, and a bit of the plastic bag up in our left corner. And there's no reason to have that. We don't want that in our shot. We would fully plan on cropping that out eventually. So why not do it now? Let us do a crop, and we will let's do a very basic square crop, a very clean crop on this image. But as you see, when we crop, not only do we get to choose our ratio, we can actually see the size of our crop in inches, which, if you're working mainly for online purposes, it's not too important. But if you plan on printing your workout, it's super important to know, if I crop this image, we're going from, our original size. Originally, we could have printed this 26.5 by 17.5. Now that we're cropping down to a 1:1 square ratio, we can only print this 17.5 by 17.5. We're cutting out a good third, at least a good quarter of our image when we do this. And so that's something to remember. Every time you crop, you're reducing the size of your image, sometimes considerably. It's also a really great tool to see CaptureOne provide and show you. It's something that Lightroom actually doesn't do. You can put the size in manually. You can type it in. I want 8.5 by 11 crop. But just by dragging, you can't actually see the inches, which is too bad. I think that's something a lot of programs, almost any program, can do. But let's take another photo, and you'll see this crop. This is our brand new photo. Is automatically getting our crop. Our crop is still there and working on our new photograph. And this is one of the ways you can really build a photograph with CaptureOne. Where you start here, you realize your focus is off, so you fix your focus. Now you're really sharp and focused, but oh wait, our focus is good, but now our framing's a little off. So let's do our crop. Now we pretty much have our set built. Our camera and subject are in the right location. And it's all about simply lighting them now. So let me go ahead, and we're going to start with just our zoom reflector, and we'll see how this affects our photograph. Simply by focusing the light is essentially what a zoom reflector does. It focuses the light on our subject. I'm going to do our best not to move the light too much, but it'll move a little as we do this. So now we have a zoom reflector on. I know you guys can't see, but let's see if we see any change in the actual photograph we get. I see our camera is almost dead actually. We might need to switch out that battery as well. But look at that. Simply by putting on a reflector, we're getting a significant leave more light on our flower, which is to be expected. Before the reflector, we had our light going pretty much in every direction and spreading out a ton. Now we're really focusing all that light down on our flowers, which is blowing them out. So as always, as I said, we have two main ways to fix that. With our aperture here, we can go up, and with simply bringing the power of the strobe down. The third way is actually to simply move the strobe farther back. The farther away your strobe is, obviously, from your subject, the less light hits it. And that's pretty good. F11, I think I'm pretty happy with that. We have that one kind of specular highlight there, but I'm not too worried about it. If we wanted to, we could go to adjustments. We could pull our highlights down, and you'll see even like minus, I bet minus even 5 does it. And then we can leave that, and it'll apply to our next photograph once we go back to tether. Once we take another one, it should be exactly the same with our highlight gone. It looks like it kept it a little, so we had a slight, well, a little more, not perfectly exact, but very similar, for sure. More than that, I think we have a much darker background as well. And I'll put this latest one in comparison to this one. Maybe we'll go, I don't want all three, these two. We'll turn our exposure warning off. So by focusing the light with our reflector, we're also reducing how much is hitting our background. And that's why on our left we have kind of this grayish, almost bluish hue up here around the flowers. We probably have a lot of light going directly into the lens of the camera, giving it this kind of weird ghostly hue. Because the camera and light are so close and the flash is just flashing everywhere, I'd say like a good amount of that light went straight into the lens and created this weird hue. It put some weird softness over here. You can see we have some weird blue lines there. Let's try to zoom in and compare. And you can see this actually looks sharper than this one. We still have a bit of a line all around the edge, but this is much sharper, even though our focus didn't actually change. And that's just because without the reflector, we had a good amount of light going directly into the edge, into the lens, decreasing contrast and sharpness in our overall image. And so by adding our reflector, focusing our light, making sure none of it's going right into the lens, we get a much nicer, cleaner image, especially on the background. So let's try our softbox. I got it hanging up over here. Here's a very basic softbox if you've never seen one before. Essentially what this does is it makes the light source bigger. It turns it from a little, 2-inch wide, probably a little bigger than that, but small little circle of light to, this whole thing becomes a light source. I think this is like 2 by 4, so like, which will effectively soften the light. So let me do my best to change this out. I might also try to switch the battery on our camera so it doesn't die on us. We shall see. But let me do this, and hopefully I can do it without killing the flowers. It looks like I'll have to move our light back a good amount. So we can get this on here. And then reposition a bit. I think I had an extra battery in here. Alright, so you'll see our camera will disconnect. I'm just going to be switching our battery out for a sec. Hopefully it's charged. I didn't actually check. That's kind of bad. I'll get better at these streams eventually. If not, feel free to complain in the comments. Come on, Elliot. You can totally put the camera on the tripod. There we go. Alright. Look at that. Power. Alright, what is that? I just took the photo straight from the camera. Well, CaptureOne provides this ability to fire and control your camera completely from your computer. You don't have to. It's not like it shuts off the shutter button on your camera or all your dials. You can totally still work with the camera in hand when you do this. But look at what our softbox did. It drastically cut the amount of light out for sure. You know, with the cloth, of course, cutting almost, I'd say, half the light, a significant amount, more than I would have expected. Probably, that's partly probably due to how dirty our softboxes are here at the school. I bet if we had a cleaner, whiter softbox, it wouldn't be quite this bad. So let me put the two latest right next to each other. You also see just how much softer the light is. We'll try to bump the power up a bit and get a more equivalent exposure. But I think you can definitely see, even in just these two, how harsh this first one is. You know, we have really hot highlights, and we have some pretty significant shadows. Shift on this computer down in here. Whereas on this one on the right, our exposure stays, you know, it goes down, sure, but it's much softer. It's not that line, you know, we have a really hard line here on the left between the light and the dark. On the right, it's a very smooth line. You can't really point to one spot where it changes like you can on the left. And that is why a lot of people, especially in stuff like portraiture, love softboxes and giving you that soft light where that transition is super smooth. I'm going to go ahead and turn our power up a bit on our pack and see if we can get a bit better exposure. We're at 4.5 now. I'm going to go up a full stop to 5.5. And then we will, I think I'm cutting my head off a bit too. Let me zoom out a bit. Sorry if my head has been cut off this entire time. I guess I'm just too tall for YouTube. Alright, let's try a new exposure. Alright, we're definitely getting brighter. This is definitely an underexposed photograph. I mean, you can see on the histogram, I mean, there's nothing even really past zero. Everything's below zero. Here, we definitely get a little more past zero. It's a little more balanced. I think we can go even farther. I bet we could go another stop of light. And I like f11. It's a weird preference of mine. You know, it gives us our greatest amount of f11. I mean, gives us our greatest amount of depth of field. while staying extremely sharp. Your lens's max sharpness and highest quality photos will often be between f8 and f11. Once you start going really low, f1.2, or even f5.6, it might give you a cool, soft depth of field, shallow depth of field. But even the part that's in focus will actually be slightly softer than at, f11. And when you go the opposite way, when you jump up to, f16, f22, f32, you start getting into similar problems where your sharpness actually falls off. Even though you have a greater depth of field and more is sharp, the actual amount of sharpness is significantly less. So let's see. I think we're getting pretty close to a good exposure here with our softbox. And I think once again we'll compare these two, and there's without a doubt a vast difference between the two. Both in the color of the light and the quality. As I said before, we can see a much softer light on the right with the softbox compared to the very harsh, almost, the flower almost looks like frozen, cringy, crisp and harsh. Whereas here it's very soft. But we also have a color difference. If you look at the left, it's very blue, whereas the right, it's much warmer. And this is pretty much due to the cloth on the front of our softbox being slightly yellow due to age. If we had a brand new softbox with a brand new sheet, the difference wouldn't be that drastic. I think you'd still see a difference because this one, the right one with the softbox, it's going through a cloth, which will change the temperature. Whereas the one on the left, there's no cloth. It's just a reflector narrowing the light source down towards your subject. And so that's something to keep an eye out for. I personally like the lightness, the yellowness tone that the softbox provides. It almost gives it a daytone vibe compared to more of a nighttime tone that we're getting here. We of course have our white balance tool here if we wanted to do a custom white balance. If we wanted to pop a color checker in there and pick a good custom white balance, we could. But I don't think we need it. Alright, so I think at this point, we have a pretty good idea of CaptureOne. As I said, I am no expert in CaptureOne, and CaptureOne is a very deep program. You can do a ton of crazy stuff with your shaping of your images. The adjustment panel, it has layers and masks just like Photoshop. You can do layers very similar to Photoshop. Here in CaptureOne, if you want a very specific part of your image to have an edit, you can. Otherwise, you have tools, very similar tools here that you would see in Lightroom and many other photo apps, editing apps. We can play around a bit with all of our edits. So let's do a basic edit and see how it applies to our next view. Let's say we want to bring it up a little more, but we don't want to go much higher on our pack. Maybe let's pretend our pack is maxed, but we want a little more brightness here. So we'll just bring that up. Let's say we want our saturation to go down. We want kind of these flowers to look withered, kind of dying. So we're going to bring our saturation down. Maybe we want our shadows up a bit to bring in some more detail here. Let's bring our highlights up our whites up a good bit. If we bring our exposure warning on, we can probably go until we start seeing where it becomes. We can go all the way up to about 30. Let's do 25 to be safe. And then we have an edited, very quick edit, of course, edited photograph. We can do a daylight balance if we want. We probably won't see much of a change. That's a little too much. What does auto give us? Auto makes it a little warmer. Let's just do a wall auto balance. Let's just do daylight. Daylight. And then, of course, as we saw before, it works not just with the crop, but with all these edits we've done. When we take our next photo, we'll see all those edits are applied. Our photograph should look exactly the same. We didn't change anything. We didn't change our lights, didn't change our positioning of our subject to the camera. Everything stayed exactly the same. Our edits are applied over, and we essentially get the exact same image. And so that's kind of a very brief rundown of CaptureOne. I am enjoying this setup. And since we kind of had a messy up stream last week, I think we're just going to play around with this. Let's try out a few different light modifiers and see how they change the image. And then I'll maybe show you a few other tools that are a little more advanced, but I find kind of interesting and cool here in CaptureOne. So I will be gone for a second to grab some different modifiers. So hang out, maybe come up with some questions if you're here live for the chat. Right now we got no one talking to us, but yeah, hang out and I'll be back. back, everyone. As you probably heard the clatter of me coming back in. Let me kneel down here so I'm in the frame decently well and show you what I have brought. So the first thing I have brought us is a little snoot here. This is similar to the reflector we originally used, but as you can see, much narrower. It really narrows your light down and focuses it to a very high degree to really give you a sharp, almost pinpoint style light. On a similar note, we have these. These are known as barn doors. You can open them. They go over a zoom reflector. And similar to a snoot, it narrows the light down, but in a way that you can really control. Well, the snoot is a circle, it's a narrow beam of light. It'll always be a circle. With the barn doors, you can really be like, I really want a very narrow, line of light or something. You can really build it to suit your needs and reframe these for different panels to build it in a way that works for the light setup you need. And then I brought in a bigger modifier. This is a beauty dish, used of course mostly in portraiture, hence the name. This is somewhat similar to a softbox, where it spreads the light out. The light will bounce off of the middle, back onto the background, and then spill out that way. And this will soften the light, similar to a beauty dish, but it's typically a little harsher than or not a beauty dish, but to a softbox. It's kind of similar, but a little harsher than a softbox. And we'll test all of these. A lot of these will be maybe slightly hard to see with the setup we have, especially the beauty dish. I think you'll have a hard time seeing the difference between a softbox and a beauty dish. But we'll see. Let's start, I think, with the snoot. I think that'll be the simplest. And so let's give that a try. I will be removing this softbox. I will go hang it back up. That's the only one that actually is in this studio. There it goes. Alright, let's put our snoot on. And see what that does. The hardest part with the snoot will actually be probably aiming it to actually hit our subject and not completely miss it. And I'm automatically going to turn our power down. Now, have to remember with our zoom reflector, simply by putting our zoom reflector on and narrowing where our light was, our exposure got completely blown out. And the snoot can do a very similar thing. So let's try this. 1/25 of a second, ISO 100 f11. Our camera settings won't change. Our subject hasn't moved, our camera hasn't moved. Our light has maybe moved a bit, but it's in roughly the same spot. Simply with a new modifier, the snoot. So we can fire this, and let's see what we get. Alright, look at that. A very harsh light. Once again, without the cloth covering, our white balance has shifted a considerable amount back into the blues compared to before. And we probably took a little too much light out. I think we're underexposed a good amount. So I'll turn up our power again. Try to get a slightly better exposure. We'll go up. Let's go up a full stop. Let's do 6. With our softbox, we are at 6.5, so we're half a stop below that at f11. Alright, there we go. We're starting to get a good amount of light in here. As always, we're actually still getting all of our adjustments in from our previous photos. If we wanted to turn that off, we'd have to come in here. I can turn all these back to 0. And then go take it, and then we can see kind of what it looks like natively with no edits applied. So you can see kind of what the edits did. The edits definitely made it a little darker than it really was. And it's definitely something to watch for. The ability to apply edits from one photograph to the next is super powerful until you forget that that's what it's actually doing. And you're taking a photograph and you're like, why is it so dark or so overexposed? You know, if it's super dark and you're like, my lights are maxed out, I'm at like, you know, f5.6 and it's super dark. Make sure your edits, you know, if you're doing a super bright photograph, you know, before you move to a darker scene, make sure your edits aren't applying across and messing with what you think you're actually getting compared to what you're actually getting. I think we could push it even farther. Our exposure warning's on. I think just by looking we can see we're nowhere near blowing anything out. Our brightest spot's probably here on the pedal, on the stem. And we're not even hitting 200 luminance value. I have a luminance value of 184. So we can definitely push our exposure up. Let's go 6.5. And take another shot. And let's see what we get. Did it come in? I think that's our new one. This is our new one. And it's looking pretty good. Once again, we have much harsher light, very similar to the reflector. When you compare our softbox on the left here to the snoot on the right, there's definitely a shift in the light quality. We have a much softer exposure and image here on the left, and a much harsher, almost grittier photo on the right. You know, this flower in the back with the snoot is almost all in shadow. It's almost hidden back there. Compared to the left, you know, if we zoom in there, I mean you can see the difference. I mean, this is almost black, you know, luminance value of 21. On the other side, it's almost triple that, but you know, almost at 60. But that's simply the softbox, you know, wrapping the light around our subject much better than a snoot ever could. Let's kind of speed through the last few. We're well past an hour now, I think, at 3:09. Definitely should wrap this stream up. So let's try our, we'll do our beauty dish next, so we can really see a difference from one modifier to the next. Our beauty dish will go back to being a somewhat soft light, but with some kind of harsh areas. I think you'll see it's a pretty unique look, especially on a person. I'm curious to see how it'll look on some flowers. We'll just have to wait and see. I will say, typically when you're shooting with a strobe, one of the most powerful things you can do is actually move the strobe from one location to the next and try different angles and see how all that affects your subject. Because we're really focusing on what different light modifiers can do today, our strobe hasn't really changed position on purpose today. If we do a more in-depth lighting demo, maybe next week, we'll maybe see, just how moving the strobe from one location to the next, moving it closer, farther, left, right, up, down, can really change how your photograph looks. But let's go ahead and see how our beauty dish looks. Alright, we took our photo, and there we go. We're losing some light. We're definitely underexposed a bit. Our beauty dish, as it says, it bounces off the disc in the middle, goes back, and then kind of warps around. And so it does like a double bounce, 2 chances for it to lose light essentially. But already you can see it is softer. I wouldn't say it's as soft as the softbox. The softbox will typically be your softest source. There are some things that can compete with it. Some big umbrellas, like some parabolic umbrellas can be very soft. There's some really crazy modifiers like hazy lights and stuff that are very soft. And beauty dish is a good middle ground. I think you'll see we're much softer. Everything's much more evenly lit, despite the fact that we are, of course, underexposed. We'll push. I don't think we're just going to leave our camera settings the same. We could, of course, drop our aperture down to f8 or lower if we needed to. We could push our ISO in theory, but why do that, why sacrifice the quality of your image with ISO or your depth of field when you can just power up the strobe. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go up a full stop. We're up to 7.5 now. And most strobes go up to 10. 0 to 10, though you can't actually really set them at 0 except for turning them off. I think the one we're using, the ProPhoto D2, the lowest you can go is actually 2, so it's between 2 and 10. Alright, we're getting a better exposure now. We could probably push it even more. As you see, our histogram is still pretty far to the left, indicating we have a good amount of room to push it. If we wanted to try, we could probably push it all the way another stop. Let's try it. Let's really go crazy. Let's go all the way to 9. That's a full stop and a half of light. This will be a big pop. And yeah, a lot of that. We'll compare these two. This is our snoot on the left, and this is our softbox on the right. And very similar to how we compared the zoom reflector to the softbox, our snoot versus our beauty dish has a very similar result where we have much softer, more even lighting on the right, and our snoot on the left is giving us much harsher shadows and highlight, much more contrast for sure. So let's see how our last one does, our barn doors. This will really allow us a very narrow, if we can set it up, a very narrow beam of light to go through. We can really angle our light with barn doors. And barn doors are one where you can really spend a lot of time working with just the barn doors and changing their angles and everything to get a really great shot that we don't really have time for today in this demo. So we're just going to do a quick, very basic setup and see what we can get pretty much on a first or second try. So we have our barn doors very narrow right now. If I rotate our main camera around, so you guys can see. They're very narrow. I'll open that so you guys can kind of see a very narrow pointed light with this coming down to kind of close it in. And so we'll see what that looks like. If we had our modeling light on, it would be a little easier, but we have all these video lights on so you can see me, which kind of makes the modeling light hard to use, simply put. It's hard to see one light in a room full of light. So let's just take a photo and see how we did. Anyway, at least hit our subject. Sometimes using barn doors you can completely miss because the light is so narrow. But as expected, we really blew out some areas. That light really got focused and we blew it out. Let's lower our power. It's not actually as bad as I thought. I bet we go down to single stop, go down to power level 8 on our strobe, and we'll be good to go. Let's try this. Alright, there we go. And there we go. Probably almost too much. But once again, we have very narrow light. This is probably the narrowest we have. Very harsh light, as you can see. And there's a lot of modifiers out there. The ones we tried today are kind of the few big ones. We got the softbox. There's a massive one used by thousands, probably maybe close to millions of photographers out there. Our zoom reflector, a very basic but well used one. The snoot, a beauty dish, and barn doors. 5 very good basic modifiers that pretty much every photographer should try to use at some point in their career. Maybe even me, I do mostly landscape photography. I'm not typically taking out lights out to photograph the Sierras, but when the need arises where I need to do a still life photo shoot, or I get hired to do some portraits or something, knowing how to use strobes, knowing what modifiers work and how they work and what results they will give you is really a great thing to know. It's really key to being successful in photography. And if you want to step it up even more, get a program like CaptureOne. CaptureOne is an amazing program, especially if you're in a studio setting, if you're doing studio portraits or still life work. CaptureOne is, once you use it, it's hard to stop using it. It's hard to set it aside. It will change your life if you've never used it before, especially in a studio setting. The ability to shoot straight into your computer, make edits, apply them to the next one, zoom in, make sure you're focused. If we had our autofocus turned on today and we weren't just manually focusing, you could kind of manual focus from here. There's a live view function. You can go here and we can just see exactly what we would see through the viewfinder without actually having to walk over to our camera. There's a lot to offer. So I think we're just going to leave it there. As always, leave us some comments on, if you have questions. If you're a CaptureOne expert, unlike me, let us know what you use CaptureOne for, what you think some of the greatest tools in CaptureOne are. For me and for your fellow photographers, just let us know what's out there. Maybe you don't like CaptureOne and you think there's a better program out there. Let us know that as well. Maybe there's a CaptureOne competitor besides Lightroom you want us to discuss here on the channel that I don't even know exists. I would be very fascinated about that. But yeah, thanks for watching this week's episode. Hopefully this one was a smooth one. As far as I can tell, it was. And hopefully this new setup with our OBS and our dual monitor setup, well, it's big and it kind of takes up the entire room. It makes these demos a little harder than they should be. And if it provides a smooth experience on your guys' end, it's totally worth it. So yeah, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Alright.